I'm not a fan of your mayor.
Why not?
I think he's done a terrible job. A nasty person.
Trump went straight for Starmer and blew up the room. The second his speech hit, British politics went into chaos. He called out Starmer's censorship obsession, tore into his war on American free speech, and then hit where it hurts most, the money. Stop silencing Americans or face economic consequences. That line landed like a hammer. Within minutes, everything in Westminster started shaking. Because just hours before that speech, the leaks started flowing. Official documents showed Starmer's government had spent a jaw-dropping £1.2 billion on luxury hotels for illegal migrants. Not just rooms, full-blown spa services, ocean view suites and buffets stacked high, all funded by taxpayers. At the same time, British war veterans, the men who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, were sleeping in cardboard boxes outside McDonald's. One of them, James Patterson, a Royal Marine who survived 3 combat tours, was found living rough in central London. That image became the country's breaking point. Veterans in the streets, migrants in hotel spas, and the government pretending it was normal. Even Starmer's own MPs refused to defend it. The outrage spread like wildfire. Newspapers couldn't look away, TV anchors hesitated mid-sentence, and then Trump went live in prime time. Over 50 million Americans tuned in. His tone wasn't political, it was moral. Britain has forgotten what it means to honor those who serve, he said. This ends now. Every line landed like a punch, and within hours it did end, at least economically. The warning turned into action. CEOs in Silicon Valley called emergency meetings overnight. Tech companies with offices in London started discussing relocation plans. They didn't wait for policy changes, they just moved. No press releases, no statements, just cold financial exits. And it sent the pound spinning. The reaction inside Westminster was disbelief. Downing Street didn't see it coming. They thought Trump's outburst would fade like every other controversy. Instead, it triggered a chain reaction. The US-UK trade deal, worth hundreds of billions, was quietly shelved. Treasury officials pretended it was under review, but everyone knew the truth. Washington had frozen everything. The financial hit started showing instantly. By the second day, British tech stocks crashed. Billions were wiped from market value. American investors began pulling out funds at record speed. Analysts on Sky News compared it to a mini Brexit, except this time it wasn't about sovereignty, it was about humiliation. US companies didn't want their assets tangled in Starmer's censorship laws. Dublin, Amsterdam and Frankfurt were already calling themselves the New London. Then came the silence, the kind that means panic. Treasury insiders leaked to reporters that Britain could lose hundreds of billions in future trade and investment. A nightmare scenario. The recovery Starmer promised after Brexit was evaporating overnight. And it was all happening because he couldn't read the room. He built a moral disaster and tried to sell it as policy. But the next blow didn't come from Washington. It came from Buckingham Palace. At a veterans' charity gala, King Charles III stepped up to the microphone and changed everything. Cameras rolled, politicians watched in horror, and then he said it. Those who have served this nation with honor and courage deserve our care before all others. That phrase, before all others, froze the entire room. Royal watchers said you could feel the shock ripple through the crowd. It wasn't a vague appeal, it was a direct shot at Starmer's hotel policy. A monarch publicly taking moral aim at his own prime minister. The old rule was simple, kings stay silent. But Charles didn't care. He broke 70 years of royal neutrality in one sentence. Reporters went wild. The next morning, every front page carried the same line, King challenges government over veterans. And the story got even worse for Starmer when palace insiders revealed that Charles had been quietly paying for emergency veteran shelters himself out of his personal fortune, a literal monarch covering the failures of the elected government. You couldn't script it harsher. The moral optics were brutal. On one side, a prime minister handing luxury suites to illegal entrants. On the other, a king using his own money to house the soldiers his government abandoned. The narrative was finished. There was nothing left to spin. Even the BBC hesitated to defend Downing Street. Every clip of Charles's speech went viral, millions of views across every platform within hours. Commentators said the monarchy hadn't sounded this defiant since the war years. The crowd at the gala rose to its feet. Veterans saluted. The phrase, before all others, turned into a rallying cry. People weren't quoting politicians anymore, they were quoting the king. and for the first time it felt like Britain's moral compass had shifted away from Parliament and toward the palace. That's when social media caught fire. The hashtag had veterans first shot to #1 in the UK, then globally. 6 straight days, over 2.3 million posts and 45 million engagements in under a week. It wasn't random chatter. These were full-scale campaigns, edited videos showing luxury hotel buffets on one side and homeless veterans shivering on the other. Split-screen reality. Brutal, simple, impossible to ignore. And it worked. Every major platform boosted the clips because engagement numbers were off the charts. Politicians tried to downplay it, but the algorithms didn't care. The internet had chosen its side. News anchors kept repeating the phrase, "before all others," knowing exactly what it meant. By now, the streets were reacting too. Protests broke out across London, Manchester, Birmingham and Liverpool, thousands chanting, "Homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants." Veterans in wheelchairs rolled through Parliament Square, holding signs covered in medals and scars. Police had to close Westminster Bridge as crowds flooded the area. It wasn't a political march, it was a national reckoning. And this wasn't just fringe anger. These were ordinary families, active duty soldiers, middle-class citizens who never protested before. The government's response was awkward silence. Every minister looked terrified of saying the wrong thing. No press conference could fix the visuals now flooding screens across Britain, freezing veterans beside 5-star hotels. Even mainstream outlets like ITV and Sky News had to cover it. They couldn't bury the footage anymore. It had gone too far. Protesters shouted outside Parliament while Starmer's motorcade sped past behind tinted windows. The moral narrative was sealed. The King stood with veterans and the Prime Minister stood with bureaucrats. By the end of the week, London didn't feel like the capital of a stable country. It felt like the centre of a political earthquake. Social anger, collapsing markets, and a monarchy breaking silence all at once. Starmer still hadn't delivered a full defence. Every attempt to explain only made it worse, and for the first time, the government's collapse stopped feeling like a prediction. It felt like a countdown. Inside Westminster, the chaos was uncontainable. Cabinet meetings turned into open shouting matches. Ministers who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with Starmer were now questioning whether he could even finish his term. Some demanded he reverse the migrant policy immediately. Others just wanted out before the collapse reached them. The leaks coming out of Downing Street were constant, fragments of panic, fear and betrayal. One official described the mood as a sinking ship where everyone's pretending the water isn't rising. By midweek, the rebellion was public. Over 40 Labour MPs had already distanced themselves from the hotel programme. 3 junior ministers quietly told reporters they'd resign if the government didn't change course. Even loyal party veterans were ghosting Starmer's calls. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage and his Reform UK movement were turning the entire crisis into a political feast. Their Veterans First campaign exploded overnight, an 8-point surge in national polls. Working-class voters who once swore by Labour were switching sides faster than anyone could count. And then came the Parliament moment, the one clip that sealed Starmer's fate. During Prime Minister's questions, Conservative MP Sarah Henderson stood up holding a photograph. It showed James Patterson, the homeless Royal Marine, asleep on a pavement outside a McDonald's, his medals pinned to his jacket. Beside him, a cardboard sign, "Veteran, please help." Henderson asked one question. Can the Prime Minister explain why silencing American companies is more important than giving this man a bed? The House of Commons fell dead silent. Cameras zoomed in on Starmer's face. He froze, flipping through his notes, eyes darting from page to page. Every second felt like an eternity. When he finally spoke, it was worse. Scripted talking points about balancing priorities and systemic review. The chamber erupted, shouting from every side. Commentators later said that was the exact minute his credibility evaporated. A Prime Minister reading prepared notes while veterans sleep on concrete. You couldn't recover from that. From there, the fallout just accelerated. American investors didn't just threaten to leave, they left. Google confirmed it was moving its European moderation headquarters from London to Dublin. Microsoft announced new hubs in Germany. Every relocation headline hammered the same message. Britain's political climate was now bad for business. Treasury analysts started using words like capital flight. Reports leaked that Britain's standoff with the US could wipe out hundreds of billions in trade value. The post-Brexit recovery that Starmer built his brand on was collapsing in real time. The stock market was bleeding, consumer confidence was tanking, and the pound was wobbling like it hadn't since Liz Truss's mini-budget fiasco. Yet the deeper collapse wasn't economic, it was moral. A foreign president and the British monarch had both questioned the government's conscience. That had never happened before. It wasn't just a political embarrassment, it was an identity crisis. Every TV screen in the country replayed the same images: migrants walking into luxury hotels while decorated veterans begged in the rain. Government spokespeople talked about complex issues and administrative delays, but nobody cared. The narrative had hardened. Bureaucratic excuses didn't matter when soldiers who lost limbs in Afghanistan were sleeping under bridges. Online, the anger mutated into a movement. A Facebook group called Veterans Before Migrants hit 500,000 members within 2 weeks. They were fundraising for shelters, organizing boycotts, posting videos that went viral faster than any official statement could counter. TikTok and Instagram were flooded with footage of veterans telling their stories directly to camera. Every post carried the same message: "We fought for Britain, now Britain has forgotten us." The engagement numbers were through the roof, and the algorithm made sure everyone saw it. Inside Downing Street, aides described an atmosphere of exhaustion and disbelief. Staff were whispering about resignation letters. Advisors who once briefed daily strategy now spent hours arguing about how to survive another week. Ministers were calling reporters off record, floating the possibility of a leadership change for the good of the party. That's the polite phrase politicians use before a coup. By the weekend, it wasn't just opposition MPs calling for accountability, it was Labour's own people. Senior figures within the party were openly debating whether Starmer could lead them into another election. Some argued he should step aside before the chaos consumed everything. Others just wanted the bleeding to stop. The phrase "caretaker leadership" started circulating in the press, and all of this was happening while the streets stayed on fire. Veterans continued their marches. Families joined them. Protesters held up photos of their sons and daughters who served overseas. The chant never changed: "Homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants." It echoed through Parliament Square every night as the government pretended nothing was happening. Foreign governments were taking notes. In Australia and Canada, officials quietly expressed concern about Britain's new censorship laws. Even EU diplomats, who normally love watching London squirm, started warning that the country was drifting toward authoritarian optics. International headlines were merciless: "Britain betrays its heroes," "Free speech under siege in London." The perception was locked. Starmer had turned moral leadership into a punchline. By now, every economic indicator was flashing red. The Treasury leaked a memo warning that prolonged instability could push Britain into full recession by spring. American partners were already adjusting trade forecasts. Market analysts said trust had collapsed, both in government and in the pound. It wasn't a crisis anymore, it was contagion. But the real damage wasn't in the numbers, it was in the symbolism. When your own monarch and a foreign president stand together against you, you're not running a government, you're presiding over its funeral. Trump's warning had morphed into prophecy. His message wasn't about politics or tariffs anymore, it was about moral clarity, and that's where Starmer failed completely. Inside Number 10, the mood turned funeral quiet. Staffers avoided eye contact. Every phone call felt like another leak waiting to happen. By Monday morning, the tabloids ran headlines that felt like obituaries. Downing Street on the brink, PM losing control. Analysts on every network said the same thing: the leadership was finished. The only question left was whether the government could even survive the month. Outside, protesters were still chanting as the lights inside Parliament dimmed. Britain was watching the slow-motion collapse of its own political class, a prime minister cornered by the very people he claimed to represent, a king stepping into the moral vacuum, and an American president standing on the other side of the Atlantic saying, "I told you so." History was already writing its verdict. The Starmer government hadn't just misjudged the politics, it had lost the country's soul.